coordinators for this amazing, wonderful table. Let's be honest, we are just the people behind the scenes. The magic and the beauty of the table is really in all of the folks that you'll be hearing from, including Jemima at the top of it. I will be clear, and I'll say it for our young people right now, that like, they might not say it themselves, but we have some very, very, very powerful young people at this table. And I say that because sometimes in some spaces we say young people or we say youth, and then it's people like me talking. And like, let's be clear, like I'm not a young person, y'all. Like I might still be young, or I might still be a elder, but I'm not a youth. And our young folks that are real youth doing this work and that have been doing this work day in, day out for a very long time. They are high school students, they are college students, they are non-college youth, they are folks who are accountable to their movement family. And that's how they show up in this process and in this space. And so I just want to, appreciate them for how they're showing up. And even on this call, I see Adriana, Andrea, other folks, our young folks. So just want to make sure I shout y'all out. So real quick history of the Visionary Freedom Fund. So initially, Andrews Family Fund conducted a series of learning and listening sessions with grantees, leaders, movement folks, partners to identify what are the real critical needs in the youth justice sector, right? So instead of identifying in like a closed boardroom meeting, what do we think the needs are? They actually just ask folks who are doing the work, what do y'all need? Because yes, it's about resources, but it's also about what is the infrastructure? What are the tools that people need? And that's what we really started to identify. So through that, then we, Certina Foundation donated an initial $1 million investment, and this was on the 20-year anniversary initiative, right? That $1 million initiative, we were able to work with amazing donor partners that I also see on the phone out here, and we were able to leverage those resources, turning that $1 million into a $2.5 million process. And then that led to our formation and the launch of the Power Table just this past summer in 2020. So what are the actual goals? So I just want to center us on the goals before we get into kind of additional infrastructure pieces of this. Our initial goals were to provide capacity, space, resources, and time for organizations to engage in long-term strategy development, right? So much of what our organizations usually have to handle is like in real time, in the moment. We have to deal, like, think about it. Folks had initial goals and plans for this year. And then on top of that, then had to become rapid response organizations. And then on top of that, had to become mutual aid organizations, right? And then where does the space go for actual conversations around long-term strategy development, right? They get tabled, they get put to the back, they don't get funded and supported in the same way. So a lot of what we wanted to do was make sure we weren't just funding the product or the work of the moment in 2020, but that we were putting real resources to folks being able to do that long-term strategic thinking. Because if, not resourcing, it puts us in the position where we still expect them to do it and then they're not resourced to do it. So we're not just funding the work, we want to fund the process, the vision, the ideas, right? And to that point, it's advancing an alternative funding model, right? So an approach that builds power with grassroots leaders and communities through a participatory grant-making table. And I want to be clear that our table is intergenerational and youth-centered. So we have youth-only sessions. We have sessions where the youth make decisions first, and then we open it up to the broader table, right? So every single step of our process is driven by our young people and is held intergenerationally. Our real piece here about what we're supporting, right, is narrative change work, visionary work. So you won't see a specific policy initiative that we're going to be putting money towards. You won't see a specific one goal that we're funding. It is very broad and open so that movement leaders, young folks can decide what they think that visionary work is. 4 things are promoting learning efforts for field leaders and philanthropy. So we have an established learning community. Whether or not you knew it, well, welcome to your first learning community call. So now you're a part of our community. But our idea is that we want to keep feeding in and out what we're learning in real time, as opposed to just waiting until everything's already accomplished and then sending out a glossy report. Last thing here is that we're catalyzing additional philanthropic dollars for the youth justice field. Again, so we started with the 1 million, leveraged it to 2.5, and our idea is to keep growing and keep building.
Hey y'all, thanks Jess for kicking us off and getting started. My name is Brian Perlmutter. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm one of the other project coordinators for this project. And I just want to quickly sort of walk through, folks, more of moving from those great goals and vision and intention that Jess laid out to what does that actually mean for the work that's happening right now. And so You heard from Jemima earlier in the call, who is one of the youth leaders at the table. And we have folks from across the country. So folks from Florida, New York, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, California, North Dakota, Minnesota, and all of the young folks at the table represent Black, Brown, and Native communities in urban areas and rural areas. And when we opened this process up to invite young folks to apply to be a part of this, we got an overwhelming response. So over 100 young folks from across the country said, hey, I want to be a part of this team. And so we're working to incorporate other visions of young folks into this process, knowing that there's so much energy and passion and expertise out there. And this is a group that is tapping and leading that effort inside of our table. As Jess talked about earlier, the table is also intergenerational. And so we have movement leaders at the table who are a part of intermediary or leadership organizations that really are not funders, right? But are also not youth leaders, is really folks that can help hold landscaping, that can help serve as buffers and really help us think about the long-term strategy and what we're building at the table. And then we have our amazing funding partners. We have some funding partners that just gave some resources to this project, and we're like, we don't have capacity to sit here, like y'all go do it and make it happen. We have other funding partners that made a deeper commitment that said, I want to be a part of this process. I want to be in deep relationship with young folks. I want to learn about the process, and I want to be a part of making these decisions together. And so these folks are people that have not only moved resources to the table, but are in active positions of leadership, sharing power with young folks, and really developing strategy together. And so, so far, right, what this group has done together is really thinking about how do we leverage our funding to maximize transformation. We know that there are so many groups that are doing so much powerful work. And so really getting clear on what can the value add be of this fund? What can we move resources to that is different? And what can we really center in this process? And so I'm going to share a little bit of what that group of people at the power table has developed so far. So we really first worked through our intentions of how we want to fund. So the resources that are going to be flowing from the table is going to be flexible funding. Folks are going to be able to access it in as a 1-year grant or as a 2-year grant. The application is going to be mobile friendly, and it is going to allow folks to be able to submit in sort of multiple forms. So if you're an organization or a collective that is really good at writing and really sharp deliverables, you're going to be able to submit written documents. If you all just want to put together a video that talks through what you're going to do with the resources, that is also an option. And we're really open to a wide range of proposals, things that move us out of silos. So not looking at a particular reform or a particular issue, but really thinking about what are the types of projects that are going to move us into and elevate our movements and our communities to where it needs to be. And then lastly, centering young people in the decisions of how we move this process forward. And then the types of projects that we're going to be looking for, and this is all criteria, again, that was developed by the folks at the power table, are projects led by BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, people of color communities that center gender justice or led by trans, queer, and women leaders, that center sustainability, that really centers people, right? We don't want to be you need to hit these 3 deliverables by this timeline. We actually want folks to be able to use this money to think about how are you advancing your work? And we know that our work is grounded in our people. Projects that build leadership and political education and things that are transformative in nature. And so we didn't put a limit on that, but that could be imagining an alternative, actively building the alternative, or seeking to fundamentally transform a system. And then are from organizations or people that philanthropy normally overlooks. So really wanting to center Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, or newer formations, right? So we're not going to be asking folks for audited financials, right? Or needing to hit so many organizational requirements to apply. We really want folks that are imagining and doing the work to be able to access these resources. And so the decision making, so the folks at the power table are going to be are actively developing criteria and are going to be making those decisions. And so right now, sort of the framework of the criteria is that the work needs to be led by BIPOC communities, led by young people, either in decision making or executive leadership. And we know, right, oftentimes organizations are intergenerational. There are adults behind the scenes, but we want to make sure that the organizations that are getting these resources, that young folks have actual decision-making power and leadership and are not just tokenized in positions. Visionary, so not focused on a particular reform, but really thinking about transformation. And then is outside the box, right, of a traditional campaign or program, but really thinking about what can we do different as a sector. And so I am gonna kick it back to Jess to give a little more context, and then you all are gonna get to hear directly from some more folks at the table.
Yeah, just one thing I want to just double click on around kind of the application process, because I saw folks talk about it being mobile accessible. We're also infrastructure open, right? So a lot of times, like, folks have to be listed in GuideStar to be able to even begin the application process, right? And so on our application process, there is a note around, like, you know, C3 is applying through the process, but that we are actually open to any infrastructure. So if this is a leader that's trying to start an organization but does not have a tax status yet, how can they actually also get funded to get to the point where they actually have the infrastructure, right? So many times we expect people to have the infrastructure they need, and like, well, without realizing, like, how much does it actually take to actually get your C3 tax status? How many months does it take right now to get that from the federal government, okay? So like the thing is we wanted to make sure that as a part of this funding process that we were speaking to that, right? And understanding that, like, infrastructure does not mean impact. And that impact and vision is what we're really focusing on squarely within the concept of this table. So our kind of key learnings overall, and then to be honest, we're gonna open this up and to some folks that are at the table so that we could stop talking and you can actually hear why they're at the table and kind of how they're building the work in real time. And then we'll have some time at the end for folks to also ask some questions, clarifications as well. But kind of key learnings we're seeing right now immediately is we're defining metrics for terms and goals for what we have and repeat often, right? So the thing is, we say these things like generational impact and change, but what does that actually mean in quantitative and qualitative terms? We say independent political power, but what are the actual metrics towards building independent political power, right? And so that is a part of what we're building as a part of this process, right? Because that's not necessarily about what is the goal on the calendar, right? It's about how people feel about the work. It's about the impact at the local community level, right? So those metrics we're starting to get through the process of building this. Reflectively, as an ecosystem, traditionally we've been resourcing responsively instead of addressing root causes in the context of organizing our communities are actually wrestling with, right? And the pandemics, and I say pandemics on purpose, plural here, of 2020, because it wasn't just one pandemic, right? There were multiple pandemics we saw. We saw COVID-19 and how that impacted our communities. We saw the impacts of climate change and natural disasters and how that impacted our communities. And actually, let's be honest, it's still impacting our communities right now. I know that there are folks from Alabama, other places that are still dealing with the impacts of this climate change impacts in this moment. It is talking about the pandemic of white supremacy and racism and how that was exposed and deepened in 2020. And our communities are wrestling with that, and the way that they're wrestling with it and the way that they're dealing with it is not the way that we are resourcing them to be able to do the work. And so at some point we have to really wrestle with that, is that what is philanthropy in service of and who is it accountable to? And for us in our table, we are accountable to communities locally. And so we had to change our structure in that way. Folks are waiting to get in. Great. Third piece there is work should start with our values and not our issues in our work production. So a lot of times we wrestle with like, what are, we are producing, but what are we producing and what are we actually producing it for? And so we wanted to be clear that like with our work, we spend most of our time thinking about the how of the work and not just the what of the work. I don't need to tell communities on the ground what the what of the work is. They already have it. They need the resources, the infrastructure, the support, and they need to know that we're value aligned with them throughout the process, right? So that we can have an honest and transformational and not a transactional relationship. And that's a fourth piece there is that we really want to move from those transactional relationships to transformative possibilities, right? So many times in philanthropy, the way that we come to the table is we come to the table and we sit across from each other, right? And then we wonder why we can't create transformative change. Transformative change it doesn't happen when we sit across from the table with each other. It happens when we sit equally on equal foot, on equal playing field, on the same side of the table, addressing the same conversation and the same issues, and are understanding that we're moving it together, right? So that's how we come to the table again, right? Brian and I might be helping facilitate things, but the table moves by itself without our support. We developed a flexible and fluid approach, right? So again, we started this as an initial 1-year investment. This is already turning into a multi-year investment. So this was an initial anniversary project, and now we're at multi-year funding table with multi-million dollars that will be supporting movement-based, local-based organizations. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open it up to some of our other folks on the phone. And I'm going to ask a question first to our young folks on the phone, and then I'm going to ask a question to our philanthropic partners on the call. And we just have 2 questions each for our folks. I'll also ask that if folks want to introduce themselves and, as they answer that question, that would be awesome and appreciated as well. So I definitely want to start with the young people first. I know we have Jemima, Adriana, and Andrea on. And so anyone can take this kind of question, broader learning, where they want to take it. But the first question is just, what is your experience at the table being in collaboration and partnership with donors? Because nobody can speak to that better than y'all. So just curious for our young folks. Again, what is your experience being in collaboration and partnership with donors at the Power Table?
I don't know if I was included in the young people portion of it, but yeah, I don't know what's happening.
Well, Nicole, if you want to answer the question, you're welcome to answer the question. We had a couple folks prep, but yeah, you joined the call. You're absolutely welcome to answer the question.
Okay, so my name is Cobella Nicole Bennett. I'm here. I'm in Brooklyn right now, but I work in the Bronx. I work for Fierce as the education organizer. So I create relationships between us as an organization, the school system that has the students, and also just like kind of introducing organizing to young people. Rather it's working with people to establish student politics at their school, educating people on how policies work and how you can kind of like make change inside of your organization or your school or your community using people power, which looks different in 2020 thanks to COVID. And I'm from the South, so I'm from New Orleans. So I feel like I'm trained in Southern organizing, but being here in New York is definitely a different learning experience. And to be honest, I'm still on the fence about this group because normally I'm the token Black trans person who has to do all the deliverables and have to like, yeah, I've never been invited on this side of the table. So I'm still very suspect on how people can sit at tables and like completely not understand what it takes to be an organizer, what it takes to be in community, and what it takes to like actively be told that you have to do XYZ in order to get funding. And I'm also interested in starting my own org. So that's why I'm here, because I want to like rub elbows with the right people and make sure I have the right tools to create a sustainable organization. Oh, and I use she, her, hers, or unicorn, or anything festive.
Jemima, Adriana, anyone else want to answer that question?
Yeah, I can jump in. Hi, everyone. I'm Jemima. Yeah, so y'all have heard from me, so I'll keep this short. My background is very much in the criminal justice world. I come from the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. I was their youth justice ambassador for a while, and there my work revolved around the school to prison pipeline and introducing restorative justice in kind of opposition to zero tolerance policies and school policing policies that are very prevalent in Texas right now. Currently, I'm based in New York, working with the Correctional Association of New York, still in that kind of criminal justice realm. But the best way to kind of characterize my experience on this table in this world right now is, I guess, intense in the best way possible. Personally, I am 18. I have been 18 for 2 months, so I am still very much young. I don't have a lot of experience with grant making and philanthropy. The experience I do have is very much been seeing how it's a broken system, how organizations who aim to do transformative and visionary change truly for communities that haven't had access to power for centuries, it is like roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And they're like, we want you to be transformative and we want you to be a visionary, but within these very strict parameters that still somehow hold up white supremacy and all of these structures of power that they're working to dismantle. So it's like this contradiction. But I've been very thankful to be a part of this power table, because this is one of the first experiences I've had in kind of the nonprofit world where they're true to what they say. Like when they say it's intergenerational and they say that it's youth-centered, it is. They are taking the time, especially the one thing that I've appreciated the most is that they're taking the time to really help us learn and to help us understand the world, to give us all of these different perspectives, especially the donors and the philanthropists on the calls. They're very open to say, there's a lot wrong with the system and I want to fix it, but I don't know how. Youth, help me, lead me, and actually talk to me about your perspective in an honest manner. So it's been overwhelming in the best way possible. I've learned so much. The other youth on the calls, they are so talented and so just amazing. They truly are like the people to watch going into the future. I've been very thankful to be a part of this, but going through this call, I just want y'all to really understand that everything that we do in this group is meant for our communities. Everything we do is meant to reestablish power in communities that are marginalized and have systematically had that torn down and taken away. So we are trying everything in our power to make this application and make this money accessible and to make sure that it's going to the right places without all of these roadblocks. So in kind of to sum this all up, I think my experience and what I believe that we're trying to do has really been characterized in the phrase, nothing for us without us. And since we're doing this for young people, it centers around young people. Young people's voices are valued and they're actually being heard. And I'm very thankful for that. And I know Jess and Brian really downplay their roles, but they're amazing. And I just want to give all of my appreciation to them and to all of the wonderful movement leaders and philanthropists that I've had the opportunity to work with so far.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Jemima. I now want to bring in a couple of our other adult and philanthropic partners to answer a similar question of what is something you've learned through the Power Table or the Power Table process that you're bringing into your work. And I'm wondering, Judy, if you want to kick us off.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Brian and Jessica, for pulling this together. I know it was a lot of work, and I'm so excited that so many people are here. It's really great to see all these faces. So my name is Judy Yu, and I'm a senior program officer at Wellspring Philanthropic Fund in the Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, and Expression program. It's always a very long mouthful when I have to say all that out. And we are based in New York, although we also have an office in DC. And I came to philanthropy about 4 years ago. So before that, I had been working in the field of youth justice. I was actually, and Jemima, we should connect, because I was actually at the Correctional Association of New York right before I came into philanthropy. And I've also done work around supporting queer and trans youth of color leadership. Shout out to Fierce, which has done amazing, amazing work over the years in New York and beyond. But I want to start this by saying that when I was considering going into philanthropy, I was talking to someone in it, asking for advice. And she said to me, look, the thing you really have to remember is the longer you stay in philanthropy, the dumber you get. And the longer I have been in this field, the more I've actually seen the truth in that, because philanthropy by design keeps you so far away from the movements and the work that is really happening. So something I'm really learning at the power table is, well, first of all, I hope it is helping me not get quite that dumb, right? But I think what I'm really learning is what it looks like to center young people and the community impacted by the issues we're working on. And that is a challenging and really wonderful and messy process. I think we've had some really hard, honest conversations that have really been worthwhile. I feel like philanthropy, the way we learn, the norm of learning becomes about you hire a professional consultant and they scan the field and they write a report. And really, this table is making space for learning where you're in direct relationship with young people and movement leaders working on youth justice. And I think one big lesson I'm taking away is understanding how supporting transformation as opposed to reform and building a movement, and this vision towards self-determination and joy and liberation and love, it really actually requires support at the hyper-local level. And that traditional philanthropy loves scale and scaling up and funding big projects. But I really feel like this table has been about teaching that radical change happens when you trust and see the work that's happening, at the local level, at the hyper local. Or, Adrienne Maree Brown says something like small is good, right? Small is all. And so outside, and I think a lot of times outside traditional structures of nonprofits is where you find that kind of work. So that is definitely a big lesson. And I also, one last thing I'll add is it's been an amazing experience to design the grant making process with this table. To really think through as a collective why we're asking these questions. What is the purpose? And making sure it's not this burdensome, extractive process that's really based in white supremacist norms, right? But more of a partnership. And that is where we really need to start from. So those are just a few of the things that I really learned from being at this table. And I feel incredibly lucky to be there.
Thank you, Judy, for sharing. I'll also jump in and share. Hey, everyone, Hernan Carvente Martinez. I use he, they, el pronouns. And currently I work with the Youth First Initiative, which is a national initiative focused on closing youth prisons and reinvesting that money in community alternatives. I get to work with some really dope campaigns in 9 states right now, and we're trying to bring 5 more in the coming year. And I'm also the founder and CEO of Healing Ninjas, Inc., which aims to bring health and wellness conversations to light in all communities across the country. Part of why, honestly, I joined this particular space was because I was invited to do so. And for once, I wasn't called a young person coming into it. Like, for the last 8 years, y'all, I've been invited to so many different spaces where I was asked to be the voice of young people in the criminal justice, juvenile justice side, particularly. And part of what was exciting for me was, one, finally going over the hump of not being seen as a young leader and saying a movement leader. I'm like, oh, damn, I'm an adult now? Great, this is dope. Now I'm being seen as more that young person who can just keep sharing the same narrative over and over to try to influence the way that we're doing work. And part of what has been really interesting for me in this process is just being able to take a step back and allow other young leaders, as you all are now getting to see, to really share their own voice and perspectives as to what we need to do now. But because what I thought we needed to do 8 years ago, some of that has already changed, some of it has already happened. And I'm really here now to try to support more spaces like this to come into existence, because part of what has always been my challenge with philanthropy, even when I first got out of prison, was coming into these spaces and a bunch of adults thinking they knew it all and that they could like come up with every possible initiative or solution, and that they would fund it and come up with criteria and come up with the initiative, the ideas, the goals, everything. And then later ask young people to come in and pitch in and give some input or feedback. And I'm like, bruh, like how much of that is actually inclusive? How much of that is actually a partnership? And part of what was interesting about this whole dynamic has been just seeing the intentionality of the whole team, from Jessica to Brian to everyone else in the philanthropic side, and then just young people being on the call and just being able to be themselves. Like I can't tell y'all how much of that I wish had existed 8 years ago when I came out of a facility before, youth work or youth leadership was hella tokenized. I'm seeing this opportunity now as a way to dismantle that whole tokenization model that we created, and that we perpetuated in so many different things, and that now here's an opportunity to do it in the philanthropic community. And so just really looking forward to continuing to build with these young leaders, and again, just continuing to build a different version for what the future of youth justice is going to be. Because again, I'm out here trying to fight for the closure of youth prisons, but there is so much work happening that is very local, hyper local, as Judy mentioned, that we need to fund. And a lot of it has been missed by the typical grant making schemes that have been created out there. And so this is trying to change that, dismantle that. And I'm just super excited for all the lessons learned and sort of the precedent we're really setting for all of philanthropy, to like, this is how you do it, y'all. And if you're not good with the program, eventually you're going to stand out for not letting young people lead. So really appreciative for the opportunity to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Hernan. I know that like right now, like usually in this time period, right, is when we're all in like, the conferences, evaluations, reflections, and like plannings for 2021. And in lieu of not having those spaces, we wanted to make sure that if one thing we did as a part of this process and making sure that y'all can center the hopes and the hope nots of our young people as you are evaluating, as you are making your plan for 2021. So I'm going to start with Andrea about asking all our young folks on the phone, just looking forward into 2021, while reflecting on 2020, what are your hopes and hope nots for donors and the philanthropic sector overall, since many of those folks are on this call?
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Colon. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a youth organizer based out in Queens, New York City. I previously did work with the Rockville Youth Task Force around criminal justice reform, school to prison pipeline work. And I would say my hopes and hope nots, one, I think a lot of rapid response funding was like really key to this year, and making sure that communities have the resources they need in the immediate. But I also want philanthropy and foundations to think about what long-term funding and strategy looks like, because we know that the effects of these pandemics, like Jessica said, are going to be long-lasting. Our health, the health of our communities, and just overall, like these effects are going to impact our communities for years to come. So to really fund that long-term strategy work, and also to understand the importance of local organizing. Like Judy said, small is all. And so also to understand the experience, to really listen to the experiences and voices of BIPOC communities, and not be afraid around terms like defunding the police or abolition, really understanding our experiences and saying, this is what we need, this is what they need, and we're going to give it to you on a long-term scale, because the work does not end in 2020. The work continues until we really see transformational change.
Continuing that line of thought, that was amazing, Andrea. one really easy short-term thing for philanthropic organizations and just organizations in general is if you say that you're youth-led and you're capitalizing on the emotional and physical and kind of mental labor of youth, compensate them. I think that's something that's really easy to do, is that a lot of times as a youth leader, and I've heard this across the board, is that as activists, we are always asked, hey, can you speak on this? Hey, can you give me your thoughts on this? Hey, can you jump on this project? And I'm like, yes, would love to. I want to. But like, we live in a capitalistic society, and until we dismantle those structures, my time is money. And like, also to continue and to further like my personal self and to further power back to my own community, I need to go to college and I need to do things like that. And all of that costs money. So I think it's really easy to just compensate youth for their work. If you're going to ask for their emotional, physical, mental labor, compensate appropriately. And also, I challenge all philanthropic organizations and donors to start thinking of the ways that you can start tearing down those roadblocks. Review your grant making applications. Do we have to ask this many questions? Do we have to use this service where all of these kids need to be classified as like a 501(c)(3) and all of these all of these things that force organizations into boxes that are so hard to meet and make it very inaccessible. I challenge you to think of what true accessibility means. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned through this experience, is that we can all be taking steps to truly define accessibility as one of the center values in everything that we do.
I'm just gonna pause and see if Nicole or Laura wanted to share anything on that.
I can share something real quick. I wasn't expecting that, but sure. I really liked everything that Jemima said. I would echo that. One thing that I really want to echo is what Andrea said about not being scared of abolition or defunding the police and things, when these are things that these are services that our community has really deemed as inadequate and actually very harmful. And so I think one thing that orgs can do is question their idea of safety and their idea of how the state should provide that safety, and begin to look into ideas of abolition and stuff, because this year we've seen it's on the rise. It really became mainstream in a way that really no one ever expected. So I would say keep an eye out for abolition, I think.
Thanks for jumping in and sharing. And as y'all can see, right, even the young folks that came to this call, right, that didn't even know what the questions were or were prepped, right, are like ready to throw down and talk. And so really appreciate you for just jumping in right there. Would love to sort of switch back and hear from our donors again at the table, to really speak to how this power table is different from other donor tables or pooled funds that they have seen or experienced or observed in their time in philanthropy. So Judy, do you want to get us started again?
Sure, I'm happy to. And also, I know there's some of my other colleagues are here, so if they want to jump in, I'm happy to hear them too. But I would love to hear them. But I know for me, we are at. So I have been at a number and continue to be a number of pooled funds. I think, and I think there is something really unique and valuable, generally speaking, that can happen at those funds. But this is really the first fund where this is an intergenerational effort. I mean, I have not been at a pooled fund where that is really the case. And I've also not been at a pooled fund where, where everyone is together starting from ground zero, like just building it up, like designing, the grant making, how we're going to, how to reach out and solicit people to, apply for funding. And also, that the decision-making power is one that's really shared. And so I really feel like this is a table where the wisdom and the vision of people who are engaged directly in the work, who have been impacted by the youth justice system, who are in communities that have been impacted, and have been harmed by multiple interlocking systems of power, are there helping make those decisions and guide the way. And so I think that has really been a unique aspect of the fund. I also think this table really recognizes, which is a little bit different, the importance of supporting leaders, but it's also been in the context of community and movements. I think there's this thing that can happen. Like speaking of abolition, I was actually just reading an essay, I think it's in an anthology called Captive Genders, and it was about building an abolitionist trans and queer movement. And they were talking about how there's this hero mindset and narrative that people love, right? And that there's like this one hero who, saves the day or comes in and leads a movement. And I think social justice philanthropy can also be very attracted to the idea of like the charismatic young leader you're going to like prop up and in some ways extract from and use. And I think that this table recognizes the importance of looking at a leader in a different way, having a more expansive definition of leader, but also understanding that a movement, seeing a movement, a community as also leaders or as leaderful. And I think that is another unique aspect of the fund that I've really appreciated.
I'm happy to step in here and provide some insight. My name is Gina Peralta, and I'm with the Heising Simons Foundation in the Human Rights Program. And I am just absolutely honored to be on the power table with these incredible people. Obviously, you all heard, just the insights that our young people and our funders, what we're bringing, our commitment and passion to this work. So it's been truly an honor. I came into this, I'm new in philanthropy. So I've been in philanthropy for maybe about a year and a half and been in the field on the other side applying for funding. So understanding a lot of the challenges from a community-based organization side in terms of what's expected and you just do what is asked and you're submitting all the paperwork and you don't understand why. And so now sitting on this side, our team is really looking, we're really looking to change the way those processes are. Why are we asking for these things in our grant making, reporting, really exploring all of those things. Like, why are we asking for all of this? Like, we gotta let's think through this. And so it's that part in particular that was like one of those powerful moments for me, is like having our young folks, all of us look at all of this and say, like, why are we asking this? Is this a duplicative question here? Like, what really just like keen eyes on every single question, going through it and just grappling with it, which it hasn't, I don't think that that's actually been done in philanthropy. It's just like, here's a list of questions and here, like, have the grantees, fill this out. And I think we've just been so thoughtful in this. And I'm just, like I said, I'm so honored to have, the young people and their eye on all of this. And for me in particular, and for our program, we just yesterday, we went through our grant making guidelines and like, we're like, why are we doing this? Let's chuck this, if it didn't make sense. So we're actually applying, I'm actually applying right now what we're learning from this process into our grant making in our foundation. So thank you to the team and thank you all for being here on this call today.
I'm gonna jump in just one more time to add on a caveat that I think is really important to highlight, especially since there are so many adults on this call. And I am technically in that category now at 28 with a 12-year-old. But I think part of what has been really beautiful about this gradual transition from youth voice, youth leadership at 20 years old when I came out of prison to 28 years old now, and being in this space with other movement leaders, philanthropic partners, and young people, has been this real intentional piece on the adults in the Visionary Freedom Fund to really challenge themselves and their adultism, which has not necessarily been a standard thing that we've done in the youth justice field. We say we do it and we say we're intentional about it, but oftentimes, to keep it real, adults have just held too much fucking space in this. And it's just been really, really intense as someone who has been in the youth leadership role, to feel like there's adults who just hog up a lot of the energy, the time, the space, and not want to give it up. I don't know where it comes from. I challenge us all to continue to challenge ourselves as adults, because as I'm getting older, I'm getting more jaded. Like, I can feel my mind progressively falling in line with capitalistic politics, like falling in line with other mentalities that are not like my visionary creative self that I was when I was 20 and out of the system. Now I'm really struggling to sometimes maintain that youthful energy. And so having young people, not just a part of this work, but also at Youth First and in other spaces, has constantly kept me grounded in the fact that as I get older, and if I'm still doing work in the youth justice space, like, I need to have young people continuously letting me know how I can keep up with them in the current time, not with what I thought was working 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Like, that's, some of those things are played out. We have a digital era that we need to move towards. And I just like really appreciate all the movement leaders and all of the philanthropic partners who have leaned into that process of challenging themselves, of thinking outside the box, and just welcoming the perspective of young people in this process. Because God knows how many damn committees I've been a part of where adults just hog up way too much space, think they own the work, like they're the only ones that should be speaking on top. And it's like, nah, bro, there are young people coming in and it's their time to lead. It's their time to shine. And even myself, I'm trying to work myself out of the youth justice space, y'all, because it has been toxic as hell to be in this space. I almost killed myself 2 years ago as a result of this space. And so I just want to bring that here and honor the fact that I have brought my full authentic self to this space, even the way I speak, the way I chip back, like I bring my full self to the BFF table. And that's something that I haven't had in the last 8 years of being out of the justice system. So I just want to honor all the young people, all the movement leaders, and all the philanthropic partners. Thank you so much for who you are and how you operate, because I'm really just super proud of being a part of this community with you.
Thank you, Hernan. And we love having you at the table. And that just made me, I'm trying to get my own thoughts together. I really appreciate you sharing all that and bringing your authentic self to the table and to this call right now. So I know there are a lot of folks on the call. I think there's over 180 of us here. And we have young folks, we have organizational leaders, we have folks in philanthropy. I see organizers on the call. And so would love for folks, if they have questions about the power table, if they have questions about our process, to really put it in the chat. And then we can either ask you to unmute and say it. And we have, young folks from the power table here, our philanthropic partners, our movement partners. We have folks from Andrus Family Fund, and we would love to be able to answer some of your questions before we move to sort of what's next for this team. So we can,
Brian?
so go ahead.
Oh, Brian, this is Cece. I was going to ask, can I just jump in for a moment?
Yeah.
Hi y'all. Thanks for jumping on this call today. I'm Cece Glazer with Satterberg Foundation in Seattle, and I'm also on the board of the Andrews Family Fund. And I just wanted to tap into what Hernan was talking about and Gina, and just this the piece roundup. I think all of us older people need young mentors. Like, not the older mentors, we need young mentors. I mean, the thing that's been powerful about this group is that we have youth calling us in. Whenever we're on a call, it's like, wait, what does that mean? Why are you using those words and why are we doing it this way? And I think we all need, for all the funders on this call, we all need to be reminded that philanthropy is not real. It was created by white men as, tax shelters and charity on the side, but it is not real. The structures that are in place are not real. Having an application, a site visit, and, or an LOI, like all of these different steps, we don't actually need all of those steps. We don't need any of those. So the things we've been trying to bring to the forefront is at the power table with VFF is what are the things we actually need to know to make these decisions, for the young folks to make these decisions about these dollars and about the return of dollars. That's all that we're doing here. And, so just for the funders on this call, I challenge all of you to just go back to your institutions and start asking questions like, well, why do we need that? What did you learn from that? And who are you to actually judge what community needs to do the work and how community does the work? So they can come back and give you data, but do you actually know what that means? Or how are you going to read the article and the research and be like, this is what I heard youth justice organizers need. And I'm like, there's youth organizers right here in the room. You can just ask them. You don't actually know, like you're not the experts. Now there are more BIPOC folks in philanthropy that actually have a shared experience and can help push those things back. But just as Hernan said, do not get lost in this thing thinking like this is a real thing and you know more shit than you do. Even when you're from community, when's the last time you were there? You don't actually know more than the young folks and the people on the ground doing the work. So you have to let go of ego and just push back and return the dollars. That is the only function of philanthropy, is return the resources. So let's stop pretending that it's this larger thing. Okay, so I just wanted to say that.
We've got like a couple of questions in the chat around the, hi everyone, Manuela, I'm with the Andrews Family Fund, around the like logistics around the application. And so I'm gonna kick it to Jess and Brian to answer some of that. We do have a landing page, you guys, that will include the application, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about how you can find out more and when you can start applying if you're interested. But I think the one thing that I just wanted to lift up, having been involved with everybody creating something new, is like, what is it that we're trying to do and how beautiful and hard it is sometimes to do it. So we said we want to resource long-term visions. We said we want to return the money and transfer power to directly impacted communities, specifically young people. And we don't actually in philanthropy, beyond the participatory grant making model, have a ton of infrastructure to actually do that. I see this as like, we're on one side of the road, there's a flood, and then there's this other place that we are all trying to get to, and we have no rope to get across, and a lot of us don't know how to swim, right? But we know that we got to get over there. This is a chance for us to learn and practice. What is it going to mean? And it's on a very personal, on an organizational, on a societal level. This is what it means to embrace abolition, the redesign of our communities, the ownership of our communities. And how do we do that if we don't build something new? Philanthropy needs to do this, building something new. We need to follow what movement requires and needs to actually get there. And I think a lot of us are funding with 1 to 3 year cycles. And if you stop right now and ask yourself, are you actually funding to set up the infrastructure at the scale and to put the power in communities? Are you actually truly doing that with everything you've got? Some of us might actually not land in the right place around that question. And so how are we going to do that if it's not through relationship with each other? So this learning community is the space for those relationships to practice, to push each other, to encourage and question each other, and actually do the hard work of building the infrastructure that we need to return all that money. In reality, you guys, philanthropy is funding, it's like a slice of what public dollars exist that belong to our communities. We don't even compare to the money that's living in municipal budgets in city government. We don't. We're in single digits of that. And how much of that philanthropic money is coming to BIPOC communities? It's in the single digits, in the decimal places. And so we're talking about leveraging a very tiny amount of money to build the infrastructure and build the leaders and the power to actually build that next thing. And so my only like invitation to those of you who are on the philanthropic side is, you're gonna have to figure out how you're gonna feel in 10 years. How are we gonna feel in 10 years if we didn't do the hard work of being challenged, having uncomfortable moments, encouraging and supporting and pushing our board, and actually building infrastructure within our institutions that are about this democratic return of the resources. Inside the actual fund, whatever that will mean for how the fund looks and who's running it and who gets to say yes. It is, if we're gonna actually get there, it means we're gonna have to stand in the muck of the water in the road so that we could get there, right? So I just wanted to kind of say that to everybody. I'm here as a resource. All of the funders at this table, for those of you who are on the philanthropic side, we are here to talk with you, to brainstorm, to have midnight conversations, to holler at your boss. What do we need to do to support you, to courage up, and to practice up, right? Because that's the other piece. What Nicole said at the top of this call, what is going on? I'm not sure if I trust y'all. That's real, because we have not been trustworthy. We are still in the middle of trying to show up trustworthy. And so what, you know, if we're gonna actually have spaces where the truth that we speak is actually the life that we lead, we're gonna need to encourage and be transformative about our stuff, right? We're gonna need to know how to wrestle with the mistakes that we will inevitably make, that I have already made, that I will probably continue to make. And then Hernan's gonna be like, come on, you old past due yelder, let's go. You know, and Andrea's gonna be like, Manny, that ain't it, sis, that ain't it. So I'm just encouraging all of you guys, you know, this is not just this one opportunity for a fund, you know, a grant. We're talking about building the basic infrastructure for the long-term, multi-year road, not just to dream, but to implement, because we're not gonna get to this overnight. And it's a radical thing to call for a fundamental transformation in the middle of the decimation that our communities have been facing. But how else will we guarantee that we're going to have something else? So I just wanted to kind of say that. I'm going to kick it back to Jess and Brian to answer some of the additional questions.
Yeah, I can definitely. So I'll answer a couple of the process questions. So there's a question around like the adulting and how we're challenging that as a process. And there's some process questions around the application RFP process itself. One on the adulting side of the things I will name that it's something that we're consistently evaluating in real time as we're building. So anything that we initially thought of, what we thought of at the beginning, is not what it looks like now. And that's actually okay that we created the process in that way. So, right, like even our timeline. Sometimes these timelines that we have in philanthropy are what are they in service of? What happens if the report comes in on the 15th and not the 5th? What happens if it doesn't come in until January? Arguably also like, I'll be honest, coming from movement spaces, like sometimes you still are pulling back the pieces of the work and people are like, well, where's your report? I'm sorry, I'm still in it right now. So like, I'm sorry, it's not gonna come on your timeline, like to sit on your shelf and never be looked at again, right? So we like aren't doing those timelines in those ways with folks, right? So, our timeline was initially to have something come out earlier. It's not, it's coming out in December, right? Why? Because we had to create a more expansive process because that's what folks wanted. We initially had all the spaces being intergenerational and found ourselves in a position to say, if we really want the young folks to be controlling this table, then we have to have some sessions where the young folks are having conversations first. They're having conversations by themselves in a trusted space. They're facilitating themselves with the tools so that when they come into it, they're not just, we're not just assuming that power relationships are all equal, because they're not, right? And so we've had to create those type of steps. We've had to create those levels of fluidity and flexibility within our process to be able to do that. We've also started creating spaces for donors and to be having the conversation separately as well. Also, in terms of how we make our decisions. So many times in our decision, well, one, we limit the scope of who makes a decision. So it's one person or one body. And we structure it so rigidly that it doesn't actually reflect like the conversations or what was a part of making the decision. So we use a modified consensus decision-making tool. That modified consensus decision-making tool allows us to identify not only how people dissent, but like what are the detailed reasons why? What is the actual feedback we need to be taking into account? What are the guidelines we need to keep in our heads if we are going to make a decision and move forward? So we use that. And also, I'll be clear, our young people make decisions first. So right now, our young people are finishing making their decisions on the actual RFP and grant making process. And then the decision will go to the broader table, informed by the discussion that the young people had and the decision that each of the young people made. So that's how we're kind of leading that process in this moment. So in December, the RFP will be released, and then we'll have about 6 weeks we'll be trying to collect RFPs. We'll be also actively pushing it out to folks, right? So for folks on this call, you will get that. For folks that we had conversations with at the beginning through the listening and learning sessions, every single one of those people will get it as well. We'll also be asking those folks, who else does this need to go to? It's also a part of the application process to start identifying those other folks. I will also say, somebody asked specifically about like, how are you making sure that we're not just focused on the coast? Because that often happens, I mean, in philanthropy in general, but I would say in youth justice specifically, sometimes we do get very New York centric or very Bay Area centric. And I say that as somebody from the Bay with deep love and deep home in the Bay. But like, yeah, we have to talk about rural spaces. And so, you know, I'll be honest, our young folks have already started identifying that criteria. And what they've said is they want to prioritize Native communities in urban areas, because oftentimes when we talk about Native Indigenous communities, people have an assumption of rural being a part of that identity. And that is not always the case, right? Like Native Indigenous communities are in urban areas as well. They've been really clear to say that they want to focus on the Midwest and the South, right? Which often doesn't get resourced in the same way that the coast do. They have said very clearly that they want to focus on regional, state, and local organizations and not national organizations, because national organizations will always have a windfall where organizations locally in a city or in a town will have lose one bit of funding and might lose their entire infrastructure. So they're making those conversations, leading those things in that way. And that will structure then the criteria that we'll share with the broader power table about how we make that decision. So those are just kind of a couple of the like logistical kind of components. And I'll pause there to see, I know there's other questions in here, just if any other members of the power table want to answer any of the other questions that they saw laced within here.
I just want to say that one of the biggest conversations, or not probably one of the biggest, but a conversation that comes up a lot for us is that kind of long-term aspect. And when it comes to that long-term aspect, how can we guarantee that the organizations that we choose to fund and the organizations that we really care about are also the ones who are prioritizing the health and well-being of their leaders. So I saw kind of a question suggesting that earlier. I can't, whoever that was, put it in the chat again. That was really awesome. I think that as youth leaders, that is something that we're not talked to enough about. Like, so oftentimes we're just like work, go, go, go. We have a limited time. Everything feels so urgent. Everything feels like it has to happen now. And especially in a time like 2020, where like our organizations weren't rapid response, but now they are rapid response. Things genuinely are that urgent right now. But it's also like, we're still human. We're still trying to lead with compassion, lead with kind of our own hearts, our own well-beings at mind as well. So that is one thing that I really want to lift up about the power table. And I just want to praise all the adults who are on the call, who have worked in the power table with us, because they are really great. And they have taken a lot of time to really just be like, hey, you matter. I know you have questions. I know like you might not understand all that's going on. Please call us out. Like, I just really want to affirm that. And I'm really grateful for that. And I'm also really grateful to be able to learn in that kind of environment. Because I remember like one of the most recent calls we had, we were talking about all this grant making and we were all talking about all this like technical stuff. And I think it was one of the other youth who was just like, I have no idea what's going on. And I felt so affirmed by that, because I was like, I have no idea what's going on either. So I just want to say that is something that I hope that we all carry on into our spaces, is that it's really okay to just be like, yo, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. And I don't know the history of this, or I don't know the context. I want to learn. So I think that is really important, especially when working with youth leaders, is that like we are super wise and I think super smart and intelligent and ambitious, but like we're not like vast of wells of knowledge that just know everything. So like I love that kind of two-way partnership and two-way leadership.
Also, I don't know if, first I wanted to also say thank you for like creating this space, but we also have to be very like cautious of when we create this space. Like I'm a young person who has multiple identities, rather it's in my professional life or in my public life. And I'm noticing that we keep saying young people, young people, young people, but we have to be honest, most of the young people here are organizers. So if you could take the time to say youth organizers rather than young people, because it matters. Like I'm not just another young person, I'm advocating for other young people like me. And it's a big difference. Like I'm not just a young person, you know? And carrying those multiple identities will kind of like affirm my existence. And we're talking about adding young people to the equation. We also need to talk about like, if we're gonna be doing this funding stuff, going from top down. So adding young people to people's boards, like it's so many organizations that have all these young people, all these programs, but there are no young people on their board. And then when young people have problems and they go to the people like the organizers and the paid youth advocates, it's not represented on the board. So oftentimes it's like not represented in the community or the organization.
Thanks, Nicole. And I think that's exactly right. The youth organizers at the table have deep experience and roots in what this work actually looks like on the ground, and hold all of those identities, just like Nicole laid out. And so definitely want to affirm and name and hold that. And I think that's just like another example, right, of like how we lean in. And it's like, hey, how do we actually need to name and call in and call out, right? What is actually important in these moments to hold and take care of? And so really want to appreciate you naming that and speaking that into this call. And so we are gonna move to start to wrap up. I really, really appreciate everybody jumping in on this call today. And we're just gonna put up a quick poll question because there are many, many ways that folks can continue to engage with this body, with the power table, with this initiative. And so we would love, and there's a email on the screen, visionaryfreedomfund@gmail.com, that we would love for folks, if you wanna connect with us directly, to give us a shout, as Jess earlier mentioned. And so we're gonna continue to have phone calls like these where we can share our learnings across philanthropy, where we can check in with each other and hear directly from folks in the field. There's gonna be opportunities for folks to apply for grants. And something Manuela noted earlier, right, is that this is only a fraction of the dollars that are available. And so we're anticipating getting lots of applications to this fund. And so the more dollars that we have, the more support that can go back out the door. And so if there are folks here that are interested in contributing to the strategy that is being built, that we are moving, we are happy to connect directly with you on how to make that happen. And then lastly, strategize around expanding the power table model. So this might be in your institution or in another formation, or we know this is really focused on youth justice, but there are other participatory funds and projects that are moving. And we really want to talk about how philanthropy can be different, how philanthropy can be more accountable. And so we would love to be in conversation in community with folks that are working on that as well. And so appreciate for folks to fill out this poll question. And then also if you want to connect with us directly, we would love to set up a time, whether that's going back and forth over email or finding a time to chat. We will definitely want to stay in touch and keep folks updated on how this project is evolving and morphing. Again, really want to appreciate folks and looking forward to connecting more soon.